Hello, my name's Natta Jain. Welcome to my new YouTube channel. This is the first video that I'm doing. The YouTube channel that I'm doing, it's all about magical symbolism and about occult philosophy, basically. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am a professional astrologer and a tarot reader. I've grown up with this since I was very young. I got my first tarot deck when I was 11 years old. I've grown up in a family that has worked in mediumship and tea leaf reading, and we've had Freemasons in our family and this sort of a thing. So the magical world is something I've always been familiar with since I was very small. I work full-time in the magical realms. I predominantly these days I teach more than do readings. I spend most of my time teaching occult philosophy or teaching astrology and tarot and magic and all sorts of other things, and Kabbalah, and you know, the list goes on. So what I'm doing today is I'm doing the first talk on YouTube. And this talk is about the symbolism and magic and folklore of stone fruits, and also the magical symbolism and folklore and superstitions around mirrors as well. So thank you for joining me here today. So first of all, we're going to talk about mirrors. So mirrors, they have a very, very ancient history, a magical history. And initially mirrors, when we think about that, we think about the idea of reflection. And a lot of the time when we hark back to those old biblical days, they talk about the idea of God creating humanity so that God could witness themselves. So there's always been this idea in relation to creation myths that there's this principle of as above, so below, which is an old esoteric axiom. And when we think about that, there's a slight reflective quality as the principle as above, so below. There's a sense there that there's a mirroring. When we talk about the principles of the macrocosm and the microcosm, again, there's a sense of a mirroring there. So there's always been this sort of aspect of objectivity that we can witness something else by, and in return we can understand a deeper sense of ourselves. So we talk about the ideas of the differences between spirit and soul, and water has always been seen as the first primary aspect of mirrors and reflection. Because looking into water initially was really for the ancient people the first time that they would see their reflection before mirrors actually existed. And so water, in this idea of reflection and water as a mirror, water's always been seen as very powerful. It's an incredibly potent symbol of the divine feminine and the deep unconsciousness. And also because it is that other realm that it shows, it's always been symbolic of the idea of the other world or the spiritual worlds or the world beyond. Many different ancient temples all around the world used water as a form of divination. And so at the bottoms of temples, they'd have these kind of dishes or dips in the ground that would be tiled, or it would be paved in some fashion or another of the time. And they would be filled, they were shallow bowls, and they would be filled with water for divination. Particularly in Mexico, this was quite popular. And this is what we call scrying. So scrying is a divinationary art when we are looking into something, when we're looking into an object or a body of something, and we're looking at the reflection, and within that we're looking for images, and we're looking for symbols that might come to us visually, but they also might come to us as a thought in our mind as well when we're looking at these images. We see mirrors mentioned a lot in folk tales and mythology. In particular, the main one that comes to mind is the Greek myth of Narcissus, who was half god and half human, and he was a hunter who fell in love with his own reflection when he looked in the water. So water has been seen as a very positive aspect in relation to the other world, but also quite negative as well. So in this scenario, the reflection in ancient Greece was seen as quite a negative thing to see, because it was believed to be very unlucky to see our own reflection in the water. And the idea of that is that we're becoming a bit too close to the other realms, the spiritual realms, and we don't want to sort of disappear within them, basically. When we think about mirrors, mirrors are that extension of water. They're extension of that aspect of a reflection. And so mirrors have always been seen as a very magical, very occult related object. And they were always very highly revered. As I was mentioning, water is very much related to the idea of the subconscious and also the soul, which is the feminine aspect of the self. It's the feminine aspect of our spiritual being. And it is symbolic of what we would say going behind the veil. So it's a little bit related to the High Priestess card in tarot. And in the High Priestess card, it's this aspect of also the past. So the reflection is very much linked to the past as well, and our dream states too. And it's that reflection is also very much linked into this trance state that we can get into when we have these sort of realizations and epiphanies, these divinationary, oracular occurrences that come to us out of nowhere. So to be able to see your reflection was both seen as a very powerful thing, and also as quite a dangerous thing as well. So it was powerful because it was an opportunity for us to practice our own sense of self-development and our own sense of willpower. But it was seen also as a very difficult thing, because in relation to our personal will, it really tested that. And it meant that potentially aspects of our ego could come up, as in, for example, the Narcissus story, or for some people it would have been a belief that they would have been overtaken by the other realms, basically, because it was believed that there are lots of spirits who hid behind the water, spirits who hid behind the mirror and the reflection. Ancient civilizations used mirrors, but not mirrors that we're familiar with today. So what they would do is they would actually polish metals. And this would be their version of the mirror. And at the time, they would become very shiny, but they wouldn't really last that long. Many of them would tarnish quite quickly. And so in ancient Egypt, copper was particularly favourable to make mirrors out of, and they polish it very, very shiny. And also in Judaism, so in Kabbalah, which is mystical Judaism, what they'd actually do is they would have 7 special mirrors that they would use in rituals, and each one of these 7 mirrors was made out of a different metal, and each one of these metals was related to a different planet, an astrological planet, and each one of these astrological planets, or mirrors in this case, was seen to represent a different magical quality and an aspect, and they were used for invoking magic, and they were used in rituals quite a lot as well. So it was used a lot in meditation. Glass and mirrors were often used in ancient forms of meditation quite a lot. Glass, initially, that was invented around the 1st century AD in Lebanon, and it really became very quickly popular throughout the Middle East and spreading to Asia and Europe as well. The mirrors, initially, they were just very, very tiny. We didn't have the big mirrors that we're familiar with today. They were just very small, hand mirrors, if you like, and they were classed as incredibly precious objects, and they were always seen as this powerful spiritual tool. So even though we think about a mirror today and we look at our reflection, or we look at our makeup or our hair, that's not really how mirrors were seen at the time. So they were seen as ultimately as a magical tool, and it was the idea that they were really significant in relation to self-development of your spiritual quest, and also to be able to talk to the spirits, the other world, and also the gods as well. So in magic in particular, in witchcraft in particular as well, black mirrors are very popular. So I've got my black mirror here to show you. And so black mirrors, so this is made of obsidian, And this crystal, obsidian, is traditionally, there's a lot of obsidian that was originally from Mexico. And obsidian is volcanic glass, so black volcanic glass. And it's always been very, very highly prized by occultists and diviners, and it's still incredibly popular today. So it was, as I said, it was originally in Mexico. It was a very, very powerful crystal seen in Mexico, although really it's not really classed as a crystal because it's volcanic glass, so it's more related to liquid water, because obviously it was lava at one point, and also fire, because it came from the volcano. So obsidian is incredibly powerful. And what happened is in the 1500s, a piece of obsidian glass, one of the traditional mirrors that was used by the Mexicans for doing their divination techniques. It was brought over to England. So it was normally Aztec priests who would use these to conjure certain visions. But one piece was brought over to England in the 1500s, and it was given to Dr. John Dee, who is one of the most famous English magicians in history. And Dr. John Dee, he was the magician for Elizabeth I, her court in England. And he had this black mirror, and he would regularly use that. It was one of his main tools that he would regularly use to do divination and also talk to spirits with as well. And so this became incredibly popular in the magical world, and it's still very popular today. When people are using these for divination, they tend to, when you're using black mirrors for divination, they tend to not be something, you're not exactly looking for images per se. It's more that what you would do is you would have your vision, you would look at it, like when you're really tired and you're just looking ahead into space, and you're kind of zoning out a little bit. You would use that same type of vision where you would slightly zone out when you're looking into your black mirror as well. And it's not that you're looking for crisp images, it's more so that you are looking for different colors, you're looking for shapes. It's a little bit more abstract, really. And you might, as I was saying, you might get these images in your head when you're doing it as well. A lot of people, they will actually cover a lot of magical practitioners, they will cover their black mirrors, and also very often normal mirrors that they have in the house as well, because mirrors are very much seen as spiritual portals, and you can use these black mirrors in many different ways. So one is in relation to divination, as we were just discussing. Another thing that people will do with their black mirrors is they will put a black mirror on one side, and then they'll put a normal mirror on the other and facing each other. And that, if you imagine those two mirrors looking into each other, kind of goes on for eternity, doesn't it? Either way. And so it's creating magically, it's creating a space or a vortex in time. And so this is done for clearing energy. It's also done if you want to banish something or somebody out of your life. You would put an image of that person, and you're doing it in a good way, so you're not doing it in a bad way, so it's not black magic, but you would put an image of that person in between those two mirrors, and you would do a ritual. And then when you are ready, so you would only really do this if you're really struggling with somebody quite toxic in your life, and you needed to make a break and you were really struggling to do that. And so what you would do is whenever you were ready, and after you'd done your ritual, you would then take your clear mirror and you would break your clear mirror. You keep the black one though, but you would break the clear mirror, and then you would just bury it basically in the ground. And it helps to dissolve unhealthy, toxic connections. So it's quite a powerful piece of magic to do. So there's lots of different ways of using mirrors, and there's a lot of different superstitions around them as well. So mirrors get a bit of a bad rap in some ways. There's a lot of bad luck around mirrors. So we most commonly think of when people talk about when you break a mirror and then you get 7 years bad luck. So that 7 years bad luck is in relation to the idea that there are 7 traditional planets in astrology. There's 7 days of the week. There's 7 colors of the rainbow. So 7 is seen as a very spiritual number. And 7 is also a quarter of the Saturn cycle. So Saturn takes approximately about 30 years approximately to go all the way around. And that 7 is also in relation to that as well. You know, we talk about a 7-year itch, don't we? So normally if you broke a mirror, yeah, so it's seen as very, very bad luck. Some people in Europe, in some places, they would think that if you broke a mirror, then, you know, somebody could even pass away. So, so really a lot of people would have quite a strong reaction if you break a mirror, and because it's the principle that people believed that if you broke the mirror, it would shatter the soul. Because the soul is related to reflection and mirrors and water. And so it would also be seen as mirrors are often seen as portals to another dimension or portals to the spiritual world. So if you broke a mirror, it would be seen as displeasing the spiritual world as well and displeasing the spirits. So one way of protecting against that is if you break a mirror, then you would wash those little pieces that you've broken with vinegar and salt, and then you bury them in the garden. And if you want to cleanse your mirror, if you haven't broken a mirror but you just want to cleanse the energy of it, then you could also put salt and mugwort, which is a herb which is traditionally used for cleansing mirrors. But you could put salt and mugwort and make almost like an astringent a tea. You could put some peppermint in there as well, and then cleanse and your mirrors with all of that too. Just wash them down basically. Depending on how big your mirror was, you know, we normally talk about 7 years bad luck, but depending on how big your mirror was, some people also believed that if you had a bigger mirror, you would have more bad luck, or if you just broke a small mirror, then maybe it was only a couple of years, it was less. So there's lots of different beliefs. There was a belief that if somebody in the family had passed away, then you would either turn all the mirrors to face the wall, or you would cover and shroud the mirrors, because it was believed that particularly if the body was in the coffin still in the house, this is in Europe as well, that if the body was still in the coffin in the house, it was a belief that the spirit would get lost if the mirrors were on show, and the spirit would get lost and it would stay in the house and it wouldn't be able to safely make passage to heaven, basically. Babies, it was believed to be unlucky for babies to look into a mirror in their first 3 months of life. And also if somebody was getting married, when the bride was just about to leave the room when she's getting ready, it was seen as unlucky to suddenly sort of turn around and to have a look at yourself again. So what some brides would do is they would have a special little pin or something very small, some type of little piece of jewelry that they would have on purpose so that they could have a quick glance if they needed to, just in case, before they walked down the aisle. Also sick people, if you were sick, it was seen as very unlucky to have a look in the mirror if you were sick as well. You wouldn't really want to be looking in the mirror until you were feeling well again. Also on Samhain, which is on October the 31st. So Samhain is also known as Halloween here in Australia. So it's Beltane at that time, but in the Northern Hemisphere, it's Halloween. So on October the 31st, it was seen as a very bad luck thing to look in a mirror at midnight as well, because it was believed that you would be also it would be disrespectful basically to the spirits, and also it wasn't very lucky to look in the mirror at the same time as your friend or somebody else, so you'd really only want to look in the mirror just by yourself, really. I know I've experienced, I guess my most unusual experience with a mirror is one time, it was quite a long time ago, but one day I was very deep in meditation, and because doing meditation, using mirrors for meditation is a very powerful thing to do, and how you would use mirrors, whether it was a black mirror or a normal mirror in meditation, or even a crystal ball for scrying, is that you would normally do it in a darkened room by candlelight. And so I remember I was doing this in the mirror, and I had this very, it was as clear as day. It was such an unusual vision, and I had this vision of myself exactly how I look. Well, not right now, it was back then, and that was like about 10 years ago. So myself, how I looked 10 years ago, exactly as it was in the mirror. But at the same time, it was very unusual. I could also see myself exactly so completely clearly as a small child, like about a 5 or 6 year old. And I could also at the same time see myself as an old woman. And it's as though I had 3 faces in one all at once, and they were all sort of sitting on top of each other. It was a very unusual experience to see such a thing. It was quite fascinating. So that's definitely, that's definitely something that made me think quite a lot. It made me think of Janus, actually, the Roman god, who's seen as having 3 faces, one in the past, one in the present that's invisible, and one in the future as well. And that's often depicted as a child, a person of middle age, and also an old person too. So it really made me think of that. And that's very symbolic of crossroads, which is very much what mirror is about, because we talk about it as being that threshold to the other realm, to the other porthole, the spiritual world. So as I was saying, so people, a lot of the time what they'll do is they will cover the mirrors that they have in their house. Or what you can do is people will also get a little string and they'll attach a hagstone to it. And so a hagstone is a very prized item in the magical world. Hagstone is a stone that you would just naturally find somewhere that has a natural hole in it. And these are seen as incredibly powerful magical items. So if you find one, definitely put it in your pocket to take home, to put on your altar. And a little rope would be knotted around the hagstone, and then the hagstone would be put around the mirror to basically give it protective energy. Also feathers in front of the mirror, particularly peacock feathers, were seen as protecting the energy as well. So because mirrors, because they're seen as vortexes, in magic, mirrors have at times been seen as weak points in relation to a house, and having a mirror somewhere would be kind of like a weak point or a point of entry for either positive or negative energy to come in. So people would do a lot of protection rituals around mirrors. At the same time though, saying that, which sounds quite contradictory, but at the same time is that people would also put mirrors on their windows or at gateways to reflect their energy back out again as well. And so that was seen as a sign of protection and protecting their house from the other world, basically, too. So mirrors are very powerful things, and if you want to explore doing mirror divination, I think it's something quite fascinating, and I think it's something that you'd really quite enjoy. So it's a very simple thing to do. Even if you're not directly using a mirror, even if you get just a bowl, any bowl, and if you get a bowl and you fill it with water, and then you place some black ink into it or some black food colouring, that will work just as well. So in ancient Rome, scrying with mirrors was a very popular thing, and the Spartans used to do it a lot. So so what they would do is after a war or after a fight, what they do is they would get these little hand mirrors and they would hang them into water, and they would have a look in the mirror. And so these mirrors were not mirrors that we're familiar with today. They were mirrors that were polished metal instead. And they would have a look in these polished metal mirrors. And from that, they would then decipher from the image that they saw back, they would decipher whether somebody was going to survive their wounds or not, basically. And it was believed that this form of Spartan mirror divination was very highly revered. It was, it was seen as something that was very spot on a lot of the time. So that's quite interesting. Pythagoras. Pythagoras was a great keen diviner as well, and Pythagoras in particular enjoyed scrying with the moon. And so what he would do, in actual fact, it was quite common. A lot of young women would actually scry with the moon as well, because a lot of women felt this very strong connection to the lunar goddesses. And so what they would do is they would hold up their polished metal, their mirror, up to the moon, and they would gain the reflection in the moon in the glass and watch that moving about, and the way it's moving about and the images that it's making, they would divine their future from this as well. So as I was saying, very, very popular with Pythagoras in particular. And water divination is very popular with mirrors as well. So, and it's kind of almost seen like doubling up. So hydromancy is water divination, and that's when you'd have a look at the reflection in the mirror of the reflection of the water. You'd have a look at the image. And what some people do is they would then actually place, a bit like the Spartans, they'd place the mirror into the water and have a look at it that way. So it's kind of almost like doubling up, because it's kind of like a double reflection aspect there, and it's supposed to strengthen the effect, because essentially it's then like two mirrors technically in action, really. Mirror scrying was also incredibly popular with the ancient Christians as well, and they would use polished metal too. It's mentioned a number of times in the Bible about scrying with mirrors. Around the 15th century, alchemists were very fascinated. You know, as I said, everybody's always been really interested in mirrors in relation to magic, and alchemists definitely weren't an exception. And what they were doing in the 15th century is very interesting, because you might be familiar that alchemists worked a lot, not just with herbs, but with metals. And so there was quite a number of alchemists at the time who were trying to perfect a recipe, if you like, of merging different metals together, so it would be the perfect metal to make mirrors with, purely for the purposes of scrying and divination. So I just found that really fascinating. So there's lots of different things that you can do with metals. Even this aspect of scrying in water, it's very simple to do. So maybe that's something that you can all do at home. Or also what you can do is, even if you just have a normal mirror, if you lighten the if you turn the lights off and you're just sitting by candlelight, you'll find that you'll be able to get into a more meditative state ultimately, and always come to the mirror with a question. The word divination means to ask the gods, so you really need to have a question when you go about these things. It's a little bit like setting a GPS. You need to put your coordinates in if you want to get a direction. So think about what your question is, and give it a go at home, and let me know if how you go with that, basically. Yeah. So that's mirrors for you. So I hope you enjoyed that. And so the second part of the talk is I was going to discuss about the magical uses of fruit, and some of the superstitions around them as well. So I've done quite a few of these videos on fruit. They're on Instagram if you're interested. There's lots of other ones. There's ones about pomegranates and bananas and pineapples and all sorts of things, and I haven't done grapes yet, but apples and pears, and there's many different fruits that I've been talking about. So today we're doing apricots and cherries and peaches and plums. So all stone fruits. So first of all is apricots. So I'm very fond of stone fruits. I say that every time I do a video about fruit. I'm always like, I'm very fond of this fruit. But I am particularly, stone fruits are actually my favourites. I really do love stone fruits. And so apricots. So apricots are ruled by the sun. So every fruit and vegetable, every nut, every different type of food is ruled by a different astrological element. All herbs, all spices, they're all ruled by different astrological elements. Likewise, so are all crystals. So apricots are ruled by the sun, and in the Middle East, they're actually known as the seed of the sun. which always reminds me in tarot, for those of you who are interested in tarot, it always reminds me of the not the Two of Wands, it always reminds me of the Ace of Wands, I should say, because the Ace of Wands is known as the lesser sun, because it is the pure element of fire, and so it's the second most positive card in the 78 card tarot deck after the Sun card. And so apricots remind me a little bit of that, you know, the seed of the sun. It is the lesser sun, or the aspect of its primal essence. So apricots in magic, they're used a lot in healing rituals, and in love potions as well. In relation to healing, they're not just about physical healing, but they're also a lot about emotional and spiritual healing. So they're used a lot to combat depression, and they're also used in spells to bring more abundance into your life, basically. It's about a sense of opening yourself up to the wealth of the universe. They're also used as an aphrodisiac as well, and they're quite a strong aphrodisiac too. So they're linked to fertility, no surprise. And they're also known for longevity. And in actual fact, this is something that all the stone fruits really have in common, is that they're all in one way or another linked to the principles of longevity. I'm wondering if it's because they have a hard stone at the middle, and that stone is very solid and it's not really going anywhere. So maybe that is why. So apricots are also connected to different spells and rituals around stability and also devotion in relationships. So a lot of apricot cakes or apricot tarts will be made at weddings to promote longevity. They'll be given as gifts at weddings as well. In some parts, I was reading, in some parts of the Himalayas, apricots are seen also as giving long life as well, and they're eaten there to help promote that aspect of long life too, which I thought was really beautiful. So yeah, so that's the seed of the sun, the apricot. Very joyful fruit. It's like a little piece of sun in your life. It's very joyous, brings a lot of happiness. Then we've got cherries, and cherries, unlike apricots, which are ruled by the sun, cherries are ruled by Venus. And so if we think about Venus, we tend automatically to think about romance, really. You know, Venus is the goddess of love. And so predominantly cherries are used in love spells and divination. There's a very old traditional gypsy spell. And what women would do is, starting on the new moon, they would drill one cherry seed every night. Is that they would drill a hole into the cherry seed, one each night, for starting from the new moon all the way up to the full moon. So it ends up working out about 14 cherry seeds. And then what they would do, so once it's culminated on the full moon, because the full moon is about fertility and it's things coming to fruition, once they'd done that, they would then put all of these cherry seeds that they had made essentially into beads. They put them on a garter belt and wear them around their left leg, because the left leg is about bringing things to us. So it's bringing that love, bringing that intimacy into our lives. So and then shortly afterwards, hopefully this would come. So that was a very old way of attracting our true love. So that's something that a lot of young gypsy girls would do to attract the true love of their life, which I thought was quite beautiful, actually. I quite like that. The Japanese had a much more simple version of that. There was no drilling or no 14 days involved. What they do in Japan is that they would just take a strand of their own hair, and then they would just tie that in a knot around the branch of a cherry tree, and this was supposed to attract love. Also, cherries are used in divination. And when you're doing cherry divination, if you imagine you've got two cherries and they've got the little double stalk that goes between both of them that's attached at the top. And in cherry divination, it reminds me a little bit of, you know, when you're breaking the wishing bone in a chicken, poor chicken, unfortunately, but when you're pulling apart that wishing bone, and you make a wish and then you pull it apart, and then whoever whoever gets the side that has more of the wishing bone on, essentially their wish will come true. And it's a little bit like that in relation to cherry divination. So you're pulling it apart with your friend, and whoever gets the 2 stalks, basically their dream comes true, or their wish comes true. So cherries are related also not just to romantic love, but they're also related to spiritual love as well. So a sense of a higher devotion. So in some ways we could say they're a little bit connected to Neptune too. So if we think about Venus is related to more romantic love, whereas Neptune is seen as more unconditional love. And a lot of this comes from an old biblical story, this idea of unconditional love and cherries, where it was said that Mary, when she was pregnant, Mary was walking in this cherry field with Joseph, and Mary asked Joseph if he wouldn't mind going and picking some of these cherries from the tree for her. And Joseph said, no, you should ask the person who fathered your child to pick the cherry tree for you instead. And then what happened in the story, anyway, obviously it's a metaphor, but what happened in the story was that the cherry tree, then obviously being pregnant with the Son of God, the cherry tree then bent down to Mary, and these cherry trees, the cherry tree then basically offered up its fruit to her. So the idea is that there's this celestial kind of greater cosmic love that's all around us, that's present, that's far beyond love in a human context. And this is what cherries are also related to in regard to that. So plums. Yes, so plums are a little bit darker. And in some ways I quite like plums for that. So plums are very much about protection. And their stones are used in protection rituals, or used as sort of amulets, if you like, talismans. And also their twigs are used as protection, and you put them above your doorway for protection as well. So plums are related to the underworld, and they are symbolic of winter, and they are symbolic of the return of spring. So a little bit like the Persephone Demeter story in some ways. So in Chinese tradition in particular, plums are related to winter and the coming of the end of winter and the return of spring in particular. So they're symbolic of the journey of the dark night of the soul. So of us going into a more challenging period in time where we have to really sort of spiritually work on ourselves and evolve to be able to rise up from whatever our shadow aspect is. And so the plum is very symbolic of that journey towards enlightenment. So the term, the dark night of the soul, this actually comes from St. John of the Cross, who was a Christian mystic. And it's about this idea of the resurrection of the self through a difficult period, and that there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And so that plum is very similar to the diamond that we find in the cave in the darkness. And so that plum is symbolic of the spiritual treasure that we find within when we have gone through a particularly difficult period, but come out the other side for it a lot more stronger and a lot more formidable. So that's why I really like plums, because plums are this incredibly significant fruit, symbolic fruit, in relation to having a really strong and beautiful spirit to overcome things. So I like them very much for that. In Japan, plums are also seen very much as protection, and they're seen as a symbol of endurance as well and longevity. So they're plums are seen as this very, very strong fruit. And I would say out of all of the stone fruits, I would say in many ways plums are the strongest to use for sure. Then we've got peaches. So that's our last one that we're talking about today. So peaches are also ruled by Venus as well. And peaches are also used in protection, and they are used in fertility spells too. Now, I mentioned in one of my talks a little while ago, I mentioned that lemon trees are used for wands for children, or for people who are practicing witchcraft who haven't been fully initiated. They're like a trainee wand, or a novice wand, if you like. And peach tree wands are also seen as a very similar thing. Peaches and their wood chips of the peach are also used a lot in love magic. You can put them in sachets. They're also an aphrodisiac, so they're used in more intimate magic as well. But peaches bring happiness. They're lovely. They're this aspect of happiness and longevity, and they're seen as a wishing fruit, which is rather lovely, isn't it? So, because the idea of peaches is a little bit like Aquarius in some ways, because Aquarius is the Aquarius new moon is always on Chinese New Year, and it's known as the wishing moon. So it's a beautiful new moon to make a wish at. And peaches are very similar in that context, that they're seen as this wonderful sort of wishing fruit, if you like. So it's always good to make a wish when you're eating a peach, because they help with manifestation and bringing in your intention into reality. So they're really rather lovely. In China, they were seen incredibly special in China, and they were symbolic of the idea of divinity and mortality meeting each other and having this merger of energies coming together. And so they're very, very powerful in relation to healing, and also into regard to prosperity as well. And in Europe, when they used to have in Renaissance paintings, they'd have pictures of a peach, and the peach would often have a little leaf that was on it. And whenever you see that in Renaissance paintings, basically what that symbolizes, because the peach was also seen as the heart, but the little leaf is seen as the tongue. That's what it's symbolic of. And so whenever you see a peach in a Renaissance art painting, basically it means that you are speaking the truth from the heart. And so you'll find a lot of fruit in Renaissance art paintings, and all the different fruit has lots of different symbolism. So, for example, lemons are often related to the Virgin Mary, and the idea of this sort of purity aspect, and the virgin birth. So there's lots of different fruit connotations in artwork, and it's definitely something to explore if that's something you're interested in. So, well, thank you for joining me. That's the end of today's talk. I will be doing more talks on magic and symbolism. I'm going to be doing an A to Z, I think, of unusual divination techniques. I'm also going to be doing another talk series on colour, and how colour is the history of colours and the magical symbolism of colours, and how it is used in artwork and in occult philosophy, in relation to rituals and meditation and spiritual practice, because art and colour and spirituality have always been very incredibly heavily interlinked. They're very powerful. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm also going to be doing talks about astrology and tarot, and all sorts of other things. So if you have any topics of interest that you would like me to cover, or you'd like me to talk about, then do let me know in the comments. Please do like and subscribe, and also please feel free to also follow me on my Natta Jain page over at Instagram. Just to let you know, if anyone is interested in having a private reading, so I do astrology and tarot readings via video chat, live video chat, either from an hour or up to 2 hours at a time. And I have a look at your birth chart, but I also have a look at where the planets are in real time above us right now and how they're directly connecting to you. And in astrology, we actually have a number of different birth charts, not just one that most people are familiar with. We actually have a few, and some of them we move them forward in time to see what's going on with you now. So I'm moving forward even on from that. So we'll talk about that. If you're interested, then just DM me, basically. And And also, if anybody is interested in studying, I teach, as I think I said at the beginning of the video, but I teach astrology and magic and tarot and Kabbalah and witchcraft. I teach a 1 year and 1 day course in witchcraft in particular. So if anybody is interested in studying with me, that's all via video chat as well, and you can start whenever you like. So DM me for those details too if you're interested. Anyway, lovely to chat with you guys. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and look forward to seeing you next time. Okay, bye.